The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss with a new orchestration lesson for you here at the start of 2017. Today we're going to study Bartok's Game of Pairs from his last and greatest orchestral work, the Concerto for Orchestra. This is a very timely piece for me to cover in this series of lessons, as it fits in with my current work on the upcoming course for Mac Pro Video, Orchestration 103, Wind Instruments. That course is going to focus on the specific character, roles, and relationships of each concert wind instrument, and this movement of the Concerto for Orchestra is really a test for a lot of my educational approaches. But more than that, this piece is one of the greatest of the 20th century canon of large-scale orchestration works, and stands next to the Planets, La Mer, Daphnis and Chloe, and the Stravinsky ballets in terms of influence on composers today. The reason why? Bartok wasn't just a great composer, he was a superb orchestrator. With a minimum of effort, he gets a maximum of effect, with unique colors that can be both subtle and dramatic. Passages can evoke a sense of ancient grandeur, all while using some of the most modern techniques for the day. His ear is one of the keenest for innovating with the resonance of his orchestral palette, and his string scoring is positively brilliant. It's these factors that help make him one of the most borrowed-from composers in film scoring. It would be hard to find a single action film soundtrack that didn't owe him something. Though we commonly call the second movement Game of Pairs, Bartok's final manuscript calls it Presentation of the Couples. But the distinction isn't that important, as the tempo marking of Allegro scherzando evokes the same sense of wit and playfulness however the movement is titled. The pairs in this case are the first and second wind players from each woodwind group of the orchestra, plus the first and second trumpet. Each pair of instruments plays a series of motivically interrelated episodes, locked together in various harmonic relationships: bassoons and minor sixths, then oboes and minor thirds and clarinets and minor sevenths, followed by flutes in perfect fifths, and finally trumpets in major seconds. After a short brass chorale in which the music cools off to a degree, the game starts again with the same episodes supported by added contrapuntal partners. That's the basic description that you get from program notes on websites. But it doesn't even begin to describe why this movement is so uniquely ingenious and colorful. That's what I hope to answer in this lesson and next month's follow-up. What fascinates me about this movement are two elements. The first is the resonance those harmonic relationships induce in the overtones of each pair of soloists. The second is how brilliantly and economically the orchestral support is scored in each episode. Without both of these factors, this movement would be half what it is. The opening tattoo is played by snare drum with the snares off. This simple variation allows the drum heads to ring more freely, undampened by the strands of wire across the bottom membrane. What you hear is sometimes a little unsettling, especially if the percussionist has carefully tuned the drum heads to a specific pitch. Just a quick note here on tempo before we start. In the original set of orchestra parts, the only musician to receive a tempo marking was in fact the percussionist, at a very fast speed of 94 beats to the minute. This may have been Bartok's original intended tempo, or the marking of 74 beats per minute as it appears in the full score may be more accurate. 94 is quite fast, and makes the movement a very breathless affair. But at 74, you can appreciate the phrasing and orchestral colors much better. Most performances are at this slower tempo. Now the first presentation of pairs begins. Bassoons in minor sixths. By keeping the intervals uniform, the duo harmonies sound ambiguous to the untrained ear. But not always. Bartok breaks his rule when he echoes phrases, to add some variety to the harmony and resonance. The intervallic distance is increased by a half step to a major sixth. All the same, it's really the minor sixths that have the best resonance, if a little creepy at times. But why is that? Let's look at the math here by simply comparing the harmonic series of the two partners. Bassoons resonate very strongly on both their fifth partial and their eighth. In other words, the major third right here, and the octave partial a minor sixth above that. When you pair up the bassoons side by side, the place where these two sets of overtones meet is right here, on the eighth partial of the lower bassoon and the strong fifth partial of the higher bassoon. So that tone is going to ring above any minor sixth interval to a degree. But there's also the strong fifth partial of the lower bassoon to think about. When you add that tone to a minor sixth, there's a hint of augmented harmony. Normally you wouldn't notice this, but when the harmony is perfectly parallel, this slight tonal peculiarity becomes a noticeable quirk. Where other composers may have smoothed over this odd timbral quality, Bartok isolates it for all to hear and really drives the point home. The second game of pairs stays with the double reeds, jumping to the oboes and minor thirds. Once again, Bartok freely breaks this rule throughout the passage, switching to simple diatonic harmony here and there, which naturally results in a mixture of major and minor thirds. That's what's lovely about Bartok, the lack of rigidity and the willingness to experiment. There's also variation in articulation and phrasing between the partners in the seventh bar. The result is perfectly charming. Where Bartok maintains the strict relationship of minor thirds, the harmonic effect appears more agreeable. That's because mathematically it literally is agreeing. The sixth partial of the lower oboe is the same pitch as the higher oboe's fifth partial, also strong just as with bassoon. There's also the added spice of the slightly out-of-tune seventh partial almost clicking with the sixth partial. When you put all these pitches together with the fundamentals, you get a very nice minor seventh chord. This is far less peculiar to the average concertgoer's sense of harmonic equilibrium. After that relatively stable passage, Bartok strikes out in a wonderfully piquant direction. Clarinets paired in minor sevenths. This time he keeps the harmonic relationship strict, never deviating outward to a major seventh or inward to a diminished seventh. The effect is quite odd in that the clarinets resonate beautifully with one another, and yet have this strange edgy color. Once again, simple but brilliantly used math. Clarinets overblow on odd partials, which also dominate the resonance of the overtones on any given note. An interval of a minor seventh results in a common tone from the ninth partial of the low clarinet to the strong third partial of the high clarinet. There are also reinforcing resonances, where the fundamental of each clarinet is present at a higher pitch in the other. When you add all these pitches together, you get a lovely dominant ninth chord, suggesting this voicing. That's what makes this harmonic relationship so pleasingly unusual. After listening to me point out all these strange resonances within woodwind intervals, you might wonder why we don't notice these more often in more traditionally tonal music. The answer is that these strange little colors are always there, but we don't notice them very much because when woodwinds play harmony over a diatonic scale, the intervals tend to shift from step to step, from minor to major in thirds and sixths, while parallel fourths, fifths, and sevenths are avoided. Bartok is forcing our ears to focus on these colors by putting them all in a row. What's more, this experiment is made all the more effective by the fact that passages stay in the sweetest, most effective range of each pair. For the bassoons, this is the middle tenor for the first and the bass register for the second. Both oboes stay within the boundaries of the treble staff for nearly their entire passage. Clarinets explore their clarino register for most of the opening of their solo, only descending in 2 places as far down as the throat tones for the second player. That leads us to the final combination, flutes and parallel fifths, which are avoided in common practice harmony. And yet how beautifully Bartok breaks the rules. Just like the clarinets, he limits the flutes to the same interval, at least for the first 8 bars. This passage is mostly scored right in the sweetest register, middle to high, where the expressive tone of flutes can alleviate the natural tendency of the ear to reject parallel fifths. When you take a look at the overtones, you can see that the resonance is not unlike that of certain organ stop combinations where the fifth is reinforced, not only in the same register, but 1 and 2 octaves above. This gives the passage an ancient feel, reminiscent of both the cathedral and the tavern. The final pairing before the middle chorale section is trumpets in major seconds. It's a great contrast after so many woodwind duos, and Bartok underlines the difference with that tight harmonic relationship. In this case, nothing really agrees except for very high partials, which lead to a squished sound. Things are even more pinched on a couple of intervals at the end, where Bartok scores C sharps instead of Cs against a D to make a couple of minor seconds. I think it's very fun to show that the absence of complementary resonance is just as much of a tone color as its presence. The biting tone of muted trumpets is already filtering out some of the lower partials anyway, so this pairing is incredibly crisp. This lesson takes us only about halfway through the movement, but it does cover pretty much the entire topic of harmonic resonances in the paired instruments. Join me next month for a look at Bartok's amazing sense of texture in his accompaniments, and how he develops those passages in the second half of the movement. Hope to see you then.